LegalizeFreedom.com. Why are we here? Where do we come from? Where are we going? From the nature of reality to the future of humanity. Beyond politics, poverty and war. LegalizeFreedom.com.
Greetings and welcome once again to LegalizeFreedom.com. My name's Greg Moffat and my guest today is Chris Cole from Drone Wars UK. His website is dronewars.net. We'll be talking about the growing use of drones, otherwise known as unmanned aerial vehicles or UAVs, in combat and surveillance. As governments and military increasingly engage in warfare and spying by remote control, who or what is really in charge? Aerial drones and ground-based robots are becoming ever more intelligent and autonomous. Once they become self-aware, will humans be removed from split-second life and death decisions? And as this technology moves from the combat zone to our streets, will the nightmare futures of science fiction finally become reality? Well, hello and welcome, Chris, and thank you very much for joining us today on LegalizeFreedom.com.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Now, we're here to discuss the issue of drones, otherwise known as unmanned aerial vehicles, sometimes UAVs. And for those who are, most people will be aware of the use of drones in battlefield situations due to some mainstream news coverage. But to give us a wider view of the issue, perhaps you could tell us something about the background to the development and use of drones.
Sure. Well, various people trace the origins of drones back even a couple of hundred years, really, to balloons laden with explosives. But I think really in modern history, I suppose it goes back to the First World War, where British RAF pilots began to use radio-controlled aircraft. But when the war ended, the First World War ended, that kind of quickly stopped that line of development. It was taken up by the US initially and then later Israel. And really since the 70s, early 80s, there's been a growing development of, I should say, unmanned aerial vehicles or drones. I think over the last 5 or 6 years, really, we've seen this massive increase. I think a particular development was around just before and just after 9/11, when the first missile was launched from an unmanned aerial vehicle. Initially, a test took place in the United States, and then it was used for the first time in Afghanistan. So a crucial element of all this has been the development of military hardened satellites around the globe, which has enabled the drones to be controlled from distances of thousands of miles away. So we now have drones operating in Afghanistan and Pakistan that most people know about, but also US drones are launching strikes in Yemen and Somalia and Libya. And the UK also uses armed drones. There have been about 250 British drone strikes in Afghanistan, and Israel too uses armed drones. So they're the 3 countries that at the moment are using armed drones. But about 50 other countries as well are known to be developing or trying to acquire armed drones.
Now, in case people aren't aware, essentially these things, as you might expect, I suppose, they look a lot like conventional fighter planes, in some cases like conventional bombers. So basically, obviously the operation of them is a little bit more sophisticated than it was in the remote control days. Operation systems, how are these things controlled today?
Well, Drones, the term drones, an unmanned vehicle, covers a kind of wide range of different aircraft. The kind of drone that you're talking about that looks like a conventional aircraft is the kind of larger end, the military drones, armed military drones. But there are also much smaller drones that can raise, that can be the size of a small model aircraft, really, right up until, as you say, the kind of drones that look pretty much like a conventional aircraft, military aircraft. They're controlled, the larger ones indeed, the ones that we're talking about that are used in Pakistan and Afghanistan and around the world for launching drone strikes, are controlled by satellites, as I say, using wireless technology. And the pilots sit in a cockpit, but that isn't in the cockpit. It can be thousands of miles away. And they control, they have a set of controls very, very similar at the moment to a traditional cockpit, and they control via satellites the aircraft. There is a 1 or 2 second delay, which leads to problems sometimes, but it's at the moment the ones that are in operation are controlled remotely. Drones are now being developed that are not being controlled via a pilot, but they are flying much more autonomously. A pre-programmed flight plan is programmed into the drone's computer, and it follows. So they aren't controlled via the ground, if you like. So there are two types. The ones that are being used at the moment are controlled by pilots, but more advanced ones are being tested and developed all the time.
Yes, well, we'll come on to the issue of autonomous drones and where that all might be going. We'll get onto that in due course. But fundamentally, can we just address the question of why drones have been developed? Because some people will be thinking, okay, so you don't have a pilot actually up there in the sky in that machine. But beyond that, what's the great benefit? I mean, why has so much money gone into the development and deployment of these things?
Well, there is a kind of various reasons, really, why there's been this kind of massive growth in the use of drones. Firstly, technological reasons, in that because, as I say, of the development of wireless technology and the ability to transmit huge amounts of data wirelessly, together with miniaturization, the ability to make equipment much smaller, and, as I say, the growing availability of military hardened satellites. So technological reasons is one reason. There are economic reasons as well. Drones at the moment tend to be much cheaper than a traditional military aircraft. So like an F-16 or a Tornado aircraft would tend to cost around $50 to $60 million, whereas a Reaper or Predator drone costs around $10 to $15 million. So that's another reason, economics. And strategic reasons, I think this is one of the most important reasons for military strategy. The big difference between manned aircraft and drones is that drones are able to loiter in the sky for long periods of time. A manned aircraft really can only be on station, if you like, for between 4 to 6 hours when the pilot is at their peak. Whereas the drones that are flying over Afghanistan and Pakistan at the moment can pretty much stay on to loiter over a particular town or area or compound for 15, 16, 20 hours, something like that. And drones are being developed all the time to be able to stay in the air much longer. A Zephyr drone, which is an experimental drone, has just, about a year ago now, broken the record for staying aloft longest. It stayed aloft for 2 weeks non-stop. So that's a really big, important military strategic reason, the ability to loiter over a particular area for long periods of time. That's another reason. And I guess another reason is political. That is, in the kind of modern age, the public doesn't really like to see soldiers coming back in coffins or body bags from interventions overseas. So there's a real dislike of that. Drones obviously give you the ability to intervene overseas militarily without the risk to your own forces. So
Yeah.
all those reasons, technological, economic, political, and strategic, have kind of come together really to see, and that's why we're seeing the kind of really massive increase in the use of armed drones.
Yeah, well, you used the word intervention there, which is something that you'll hear in the mainstream media a lot, but it's almost sort of sanitizes it, doesn't it? Because we shouldn't kid ourselves that whatever amount of surveillance is being conducted by drones, in most occasions, this is about killing people.
Um, the, yeah, I mean, drones are very much used for surveillance and also for launching attacks for both reasons. Yeah.
Now, it was 10 years ago, you referred to, that the US first fired a missile from a drone on a test range. And then it was not long after 9/11, I think it was November 2001, that the first operational armed drone strike took place in Afghanistan. And it's sort of significant that it happened at that time, because since then, I mean, we've basically had a state of perpetual war, the so-called war on terror. And it doesn't look like this is going to be coming to an end anytime soon. So for all the reasons that you mentioned why drones are being favoured and developed, their use increased, you can see how this would dovetail with a state of perpetual war, for economic, strategic, and reasons you cited for bodies coming back home in body bags. For all those reasons in particular, the drones are going to play an increasing role on all those fronts.
Indeed, and I think it's not just that this kind of ongoing war is ongoing in time, but it's also the whole world has been turned into a battlefield now. There is nowhere that isn't safe, if you like. The US believes that it has the authority now to launch attacks whenever and wherever it likes. So, as I think the American Civil Liberties Union said recently, the whole world is now a battlefield. And that's extremely worrying, of course.
Yes, well, we talk about the US, of course, and they tend to lead the way still, even with all their overstretch of the military and their economic problems at home. Still by far the biggest military in the world, likely to remain so. But it's not just the US. They may have led the way on the drone front, but here in the UK as well, our own government has got its fingers in that particular pie. So what's the state of play regarding the British military and the use of drones?
Well, the British military has 4 drones in active service at the moment, and others under development. They range from kind of very small, almost Henry the Hoover-like T-Hawk drone, which is used to kind of fly maybe 100 to a couple of 100 yards away to look at suspicious devices. So that's a very small drone. And then they would have the Hawk drone, which is almost like a model aircraft that can be kind of thrown up in the air and flies, and for a kilometre or two to kind of look just over the horizon or over the hill, really, to beam back information to ground troops. Then there is the Hermes 450, which is the drone that's used for targeting of artillery strikes, and that's in service in Afghanistan. And we rent that drone on a per hour basis from an Israeli company called Elbit Systems. And that's kind of been a little bit embarrassing, if you like, for the military not having that capability themselves. So they very much rushed through the development of a new drone called the Watchkeeper drone, which is, I was going to say a virtual clone, but it is a clone of the Hermes drone. And that's been produced in Leicester, a factory owned by Thales, and that will be coming into service any day now. It should have already been in service, but it has been delayed. But at the moment, the Hermes drone is being used by the army to target artillery strikes. But it will soon be the Watchkeeper drone. And then we have the Reaper drone, which is the armed drone that we bought from the United States, from General Atomics. We have 5 of those in operation. It may be 6 by now. I'm hearing another drone has been put into service. David Cameron agreed to double the number of drones armed drones from 5 to 10, December 2010. So slowly more of these drones are being integrated into British service in the United States. Currently, the RAF operates the drones. The drones themselves are obviously in the theatre in Afghanistan, but they're operated by a remote control from Creech Air Force Base in Nevada. But later this year, we were expecting it to be the summer, but again, I'm hearing it may be a bit later now. The drones, RAF pilots will start operating the drones from here in the UK. And we know from Freedom of Information requests that there have been more than 250 British drone strikes in Afghanistan. But we know very little detail about those strikes. There is much more information about the so-called secretive CIA strikes in Pakistan and Yemen than there is about the British drone strikes in Afghanistan.
Now, you mentioned the CIA, and this may raise a few eyebrows with listeners, but this isn't just a purely military thing by any means. I mean, there are drones being used for various purposes, various private companies, but the fact that the CIA, the US Central Intelligence Agency, have got their own fleet of drones is also raises different concerns because they're being used. Some obviously overlap with military agendas, but perhaps say something about the difference between, or perhaps similarities with what the CIA would be doing with drones.
Yes, I mean, under international law, the military is supposed to conduct military operations. The Central Intelligence Agency is outside military control and has no proper public accountability or legal. So it is unlawfully, many would say, and many lawyers have given that opinion, for the CIA to operate drone strikes, particularly outside what have been declared theatres of war, such as Afghanistan. But the Central Intelligence Agency, we know from leaks and also just recently, President Obama and the US counterterrorism chief advisor John Brennan has acknowledged finally, after many years, that the CIA is indeed conducting the strikes. So there are many legal concerns about that, operating targeted killings, assassinations as we would call them, outside the laws of war.
Yeah, these are the so-called extrajudicial killings that we sometimes hear about. But
absolutely.
Quite often these are happening when, we sometimes in the media you'll hear a report, for example, of a drone strike, and it's suspected insurgents and alleged terrorist leaders, and sometimes those words are slipped in and we don't perhaps notice them. But quite often, particularly in the case of the CIA, it's about taking out people that they believe have done something or are doing something or may do something in future. I mean, in that case, it's getting to be like Minority Report or something.
It is. I mean, it is worrying. Philip Alston, who was the UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial, he's been very much somebody who's been challenging the US and also the UK by implicitly about these extrajudicial killings. I mean, it wasn't long before 9/11. It was a few months before 9/11 that the US absolutely condemned Israel for undertaking targeted killings. And so here we are, 10 years later, and they're doing it all the time. Now, there are two types of what are called targeted killings by the US. There is those that go after particular individuals. I guess the most famous recent one has been that of Anwar al-Awlaki, who was a joint US Yemeni citizen, who was killed, who was alleged to be a senior member of Al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula. And 3 times the US tried to kill him with drone strikes, and on the 3rd time they did. But there have been no charges at all whatsoever laid against him. So, although the US claim that there has been due process in his targeted killing, but they said it's due process, not I've forgotten what the word is, accountable process or something like that. Mm-hmm. But that's one type of targeted killing where there is an individual that's on a list, and there has been some sort of process to put him on that list and target him or her. But there is another type of list, as you say, they're so-called signature strikes, where the person or the group of people supposed to have the signature of Al-Qaeda operatives or the hallmark of Al-Qaeda operatives. And this is often taken from movement of vehicles and kind of movements around a particular compound or location. And so those people are then targeted for assassination because they have almost like the hallmark or the signature of Al-Qaeda operatives. And as Philip Alston said, once you start using this methodology, once you start deciding to target people for killing, it will get wider and wider. And he has been proven correct in this, that, initially the CIA and the US said they were taking out the senior leaders of Al-Qaeda. And it's now gone down to a situation where it's much more, we don't even know who these people are that are being targeted for assassination.
Mm. Well, and we've had problems documented in the past with fighter pilots, particularly in Iraq and Afghanistan, because we see some of the footage has been released or leaked of innocent people being attacked from the air and killed because they were behaving suspiciously, or they thought they had guns. It turns out they had, I don't know, shepherd's crooks or something. And that was with a pilot in the air directly above, albeit very far above, the actual scene. You only can aggravate, the potential for, mistakes like that if someone is thousands of miles away. I'm not sure that the technology exists to give them any greater, more accurate view of what's actually happening on the ground. I mean, I've seen a lot of pictures, some from drone monitoring stations, and some from, in cockpit footage from actual fighter planes. And we sometimes think that quality is going to be like, television or something, but it's very often very unclear what's going on the ground.
It is indeed. I mean, and I think that, again, that's another concern, that there is this kind of belief and faith in the clarity of the drone camera pictures and the accuracy of drone strikes, which is, far from proved to be correct. Last year, 2 US soldiers were killed in a US drone strike, mistakenly. And, so that's, some kind of indication that the accuracy and clarity of these cameras are not all that they should be or claim to be. And the father of one of the soldiers killed in that strike was shown by the military, the footage. And he said in the report to the Los Angeles Times, he told the Los Angeles Times reporter that, all you could see were blobs on a screen. That's the phrase he used. And he said that you couldn't really see faces, you couldn't see uniforms, you couldn't see anything. He said it was just blobs moving around on the screen. So there is real concern that although there is lots of claims that the footage is very clear and the weapons are incredibly accurate, that it isn't so. And we need much more information about this to be released. And
well, that's another vital issue, isn't it? Because the use of drones is on the increase. I mean, and it's in the open to the extent that we're here talking about it, and you see some media reports, but accurate information is very difficult to access.
Absolutely, particularly in the UK. there is virtually nothing. The MOD refuses to answer all questions about drone strikes and to divulge any information or any details about the more than 250 drone strikes. And their argument is that any information would put British soldiers, any information released about drone strikes would put British forces at risk. And, we've argued that, with more than 250 drone strikes now, there must be some information about drone strikes that can be released. But they are simply stonewalling and refusing to release any information. And the danger is that far from saving lives, keeping all this secret, keeping all this behind closed doors, will put more British lives at risk. Just this weekend, another counterterrorism official has resigned, and a US counter official has resigned, and says that the increased use of drone strikes is turning more and more people into terrorists. And the same thing could be happening in Afghanistan. And unless we really investigate this, and unless we have a proper debate and have using proper information, we can't know really what's happening about these drone strikes. So it's very important that we pressurize the MOD to release more information about these drone strikes.
Now, one of the key restraining factors in military operations is the risk to human beings, personnel, on the ground or just in the theatre generally. And once you remove that, as you would do with drones, I mean, that opens up, as I see it, some very dangerous possibilities. If you're no longer having to, as a commander, you're no longer having to factor that in. Yes, you don't want to lose too many of your machines, but in conflict situations we've seen in history, where there's a high risk to sort of human life, that is a major factor in planning and strategy. And where you're just risking machines, or in the case of you're on a bombing mission and your only cost really is bombs, the gloves tend to come off, and it's like hell for leather, and that's not going to that doesn't bode well if drones are going to play an increasing part in future warfare.
That's right. I mean, I think for me the primary concern about drones is the fact that the so-called risk-free warfare will mean that there will be more wars in the future, and not only more wars in general, but more attacks within those, more armed attacks, because as you say, the traditional restraint on launching attacks has always been the risk to your own forces. But if you take that restraint away, why won't there be more wars? Why won't there be more attacks if there is no restraint? And it's kind of early in the era of the drone wars, really, but already we're getting some indication of that. Last year, 2011, the US was involved in conflicts in 6 different countries, pretty much simultaneously, in Iraq and in Afghanistan, in Pakistan and Yemen, Somalia and Libya. All of those conflicts using drones. Many military commentators have kind of noted this and said that it really wouldn't have been possible for the US to be engaged in so many wars without the use of drones.
Yes.
So that's kind of one indication that drones are making war more likely already. The kind of another aspect of that is that the kind of, as you say, the kind of psychological and physical distance between the drone operator and the target could make it easier for that operator to launch weapons. So they're seeing kind of pixels rather than people. And again, it's kind of early, and it's difficult to get the information because so much details about what's actually happening when the strike takes place remains classified. But earlier this year, one report into an attack on a convoy in which 24 civilians in Afghanistan were killed was released after pressure by freedom of information campaigners in the US. And that report showed that there was, as the report put it, a propensity to kinetic attack by the drone operators. That meant that they were really keen that an attack actually took place. And when some people who were following the convoy via the video screen noted or suggested that maybe children or civilians in the convoy, the drone operators really downplayed that information and kind of rubbished it because they wanted a drone attack to go ahead. And in the report, one of the commanders at Creech admitted, if you like, that there was a real Top Gun mentality amongst the drone pilots at Creech. So that's extremely worrying. And that's, of course, only one report, but it is the only report that we have. Mm-hmm. Again, there needs to be much more investigation of what's happening when a drone strike actually happens.
Well, is it just me? I suspect it's not. That's thinking of this and going, this is when you're on, I was going to say the right side of one of these situations, but there is no right side. But isn't this beginning to look, like a computer game?
Well, yeah. I mean, yes, it's ironic. It's not the right word at all. But these kind of young men and women who are operating drones have kind of grown up on a game of video warfare, and they're moving from playing games of video warfare to conducting warfare via video, and maybe then going home in the evening and playing war video games. We don't know. So yeah, this is extremely worrying.
Well, there's been in the conspiracy arena, I've certainly heard information put forward that the military are quite keen on a lot of shoot 'em up computer games, and now some of them, the ones currently available, and no doubt those in development, realistic is perhaps the wrong word, but they're certainly you can get steeped in them when you're playing these. They're complete experiential games, so that you get very, very much into what you're doing, and you can see how it would be not much of a leap to go from that to just looking at another screen with similar images on it. It's somehow unreal. Pulling triggers, pressing buttons, bombs going off, you don't really hear it, you don't see it, you don't feel it, and then, as you said, you just go home and have your dinner, really, and that's it.
It is extremely worrying, and as you say, the military are quite keen on video games, and we know that they use in military recruitment offices now video games to draw young people in where they can play games, and also. On the US Air Force website, you can actually play at being a drone pilot. There's a video game that you can play. So it's all kind of almost science fiction, really, that you can go from playing at being a drone pilot to being recruited and actually playing via video at war.
Now, we're already seeing, wars quite often these days are not declared as such. They just, they just happen. As we said earlier, the US, not solely the US by any means, but generally speaking, the US will just intervene somewhere. They might make a case for it in the media beforehand. And drones play into this blurring of, when is a war, and since 9/11, the state I referred to earlier, virtually in perpetual war. And if drones are able to be used increasingly to fly certain missions or achieve certain ends, then you can do that with less people involved, obviously. Secrecy is easier to achieve if there's no one, going out and flying a mission as such. It's just, you can do it with less people, you can do it more in secret, and you can do it with less build-up, perhaps less preparation. And if it's in secret, then you don't need to make a case for it. It can all be done and dusted. No one really, only the need-to-know insiders will be aware of what's occurring. And it can just roll on. It doesn't have to be a beginning and an end. In the way that there is with some military action. For example, it's by no means a bed of roses in Libya now, but there's a certain feeling that military action began there and it's now over. With drones, a future where they were perhaps, involved in most military action, then when does the war begin and end?
Well, I mean, I think if it's not too much of a cliche, people are saying it already, drones are changing the nature of warfare. But as you say, it's much easier to intervene. It's much like more likely that in the future there will not be a start and an end to war. That there is just an ongoing war against terrorism, as it's called now. I'm sure there will be a new name eventually, and that the whole world is a battlefield. And at the moment, it's primarily the US with the UK and Israel as well. But it won't be long before other nations, China, Russia, Iran, other countries will be getting this, and we will see a kind of global conflict of drones.
Well, yeah, is it because we've sort of seen it's the end, the era of armies in a field somewhere squaring up against each other. 10,000 men on the left and 10,000 on the right. That's long gone. I mean, could we see a future of fleets of drones, fighting each other over some territory or some end? A fleet of Chinese drones, swarming over the US to be met by the fleet of US drones. I mean, that sounds very science fiction, but I suppose it's one possible future.
Well, it's certainly is one possible future, and it's one that's being planned for at the moment. The main problem the military have with drones at the moment is that they're very vulnerable. They're comparatively quite slow and easy to shoot down. That's why they're being used, in conflicts in theatres where there isn't any air defence. But the military recognise that and are already developing technology that will enable drones to defend themselves. And recently there was a test, an exercise, a military exercise where drones fought each other. US, I think it was mostly done virtually rather than done physically, but that is beginning to be thought about. And some people would argue, well, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe if it's just drones against drones, where people aren't being killed or injured, that would be a good thing. But I suspect, as in all wars, the vast majority of injuries and casualties are caused to people, particularly civilians.
Yes,
that will continue.
Well, speaking of civilian deaths, and with the persistent presence of drones, which you mentioned earlier, drones can stay in the sky for longer, but also they're increasingly being deployed to sort of hover around, not on any particular mission as such, or looking for any particular individual, but looking for suspicious behavior, or what you refer to in your Drone Wars briefing as targets of opportunity. Yeah. Sort of, we didn't know what we'd find today, but look, this is someone, or this looks like someone we've been on the lookout for. Maybe we should take them out now. And this is a bit like the difference between police going out, detectives going out to investigate a crime, and police perhaps on what's known as fishing expeditions, where they're just trawling, looking for something that may be of interest. And with drones engaging in looking for suspicious behavior or so-called targets of opportunity, that's bound to lead to more civilian deaths.
Yes, indeed. I mean, I think, again, we don't know because of the lack of information, but my reading around the subject and my research has led me to believe that most of the civilian casualties in Pakistan, and we can talk about Pakistan because we have some data, some information about what's happening. But my belief is that most of the civilian casualties have come from this drones looking for targets of opportunity rather than pre-planned missions. And there does seem to be two types of ways which just to kind of clarify, there seems to be three ways in which drones are being used at the moment. Firstly, just as with manned or piloted aircraft, if you're about to attack or your troops come under attack, you use drones in the same way as manned aircraft for cover, overhead cover. And then the second way is this persistent presence where you're looking for targets of opportunity. And then the third way is the specific targeted assassinations. And as I say, I think it's the second way that drones are being used, where they're kind of loitering over a particular region or area or even kind of village or compound looking for targets of opportunity, where the civilian casualties appear to be coming from that type of behavior. But that is, again, my surmise from the little information that we have, and again, we need much more information to be released to have a clear idea of where the civilian casualties are coming from.
Now, I suppose in, for example, the US drone strikes in, say, for example, Pakistan, I've certainly read and heard some media spin where they're almost trying to use the fact that it was a drone attack to put some distance between themselves and what has happened on the ground, which I don't think they can credibly do, but they do attempt to do that. But there's no getting away from the fact that, I mean, as you would expect, drone strikes in Pakistan are extremely unpopular. And if it's the US we're talking about, all they're doing is making enemies. I mean, we've seen this tendency in the entire so-called war on terror. But this is not really achieving an end. It might be a short-term end, taking out a particular leader somewhere, but they're really storing up many more problems for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that Batusula Masjid, who was one of the senior leaders of the Taliban in Pakistan before he and his family were assassinated by a drone strike, one of the things that he said was that for every drone strike, he got 3 new people wanting to undertake suicide bomb attacks. So there is this kind of real, you can really see it, that there is a kind of rise in hatred of the West every time there is a drone strike. And a number of the attempted terrorist attacks in the US, they've said that they were trying to undertake terrorist attacks, suicide missions, because of the drone strikes in Pakistan. So this idea that that drones somehow are helpful, kind of increase the security and are a tool to increase security and take out the bad guys is unfortunately nonsense. Rather than increasing security, drone strikes decrease security.
Now, and the issue that we touched upon earlier is increasing sort of autonomy of drones and the related issue of self-awareness in some of these machines. And just reading from a recent article that you wrote in the current issue of Nexus, and it's also material which people can find in your Drone Wars briefing if they're interested. Drones now in development can take off by themselves, fly their pre-programmed mission, return and land, all without the intervention of a human pilot. And this is a step on, even again, from what we've been talking about earlier with a remote controlled situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not something that's going to happen soon in the near future. That's actually happening now, that drones can fly autonomously. There's a lot of argument about what constitutes autonomy when it comes to anything really, but when it comes to drones in particular, because that's the technology that's most to the fore at the moment. And various people argue that there are different stages. Some say there are 7 stages to full autonomy. Some say there are 9. But at the moment, we're very much creeping towards full autonomy. It's some way off yet, I think, but it's not that far off. And here in the UK, the British government has said quite categorically, we are not currently planning to develop autonomous weapons, or we are not at the moment planning to have a human out of the loop when it comes to launching weapons. Because it's one thing for a drone to take off and fly and come back and land by itself. It's completely different for a drone to decide when and where to launch weapons. The trouble is that we know that in lots of military research labs and British universities and American universities, there is a real push to investigate this and research this. And the fear is that once the technology has been developed, once that it's there is a real temptation. It's very difficult for political leaders not to put that into the field. So although the governments are saying, there will always be a human in the loop when it comes to launching weapons, in various military laboratories around the world, autonomy is being investigated at a very fast rate.
Yeah, and this sort of, in general, in the military arena, this research is not done for academic curiosity purposes. It If it starts out like that and it proves to be feasible technology, it gets developed to be used at some point.
Absolutely. Just recently, the British Ministry of Defence put out a request to kind of marry, face recognition technology with drones. So, once this stuff is done kind of at an academic theory level, it soon gets picked up and put together with other technology and will be used.
Well, yeah, it makes me think of, when I hear stories of, biological agents being developed in labs that, this will kill, 95% of living organisms. Why are you developing it? What's the why is it so heavily funded? I mean, we're not talking something that extreme, but there's a lot of research that goes on that, on the face of it, either has no purpose, or the only one we can think of will be incredibly negative or sinister, and yet it goes on.
Absolutely. There are, various kind of organisations campaigning for much more ethical behaviour in the military laboratory, the Scientists for Global Responsibility, for instance. And unfortunately, I think academics can sometimes get detached from the real world. And funding is another issue. The only real people that have funding for lots of this kind of technology and engineering are the military. And unfortunately, the universities have to chase that funding.
Yeah, there's an amazing number of, just on a side note, there's an amazing number of things in everyday life that were originally spun off from military technology. Nothing springs to mind. I think things like Teflon and
yes, but I mean they cost billions and billions of pounds to develop, and, and these things are kind of spun off. I think that the vast amounts of money that are spent on researching military technology could be put to much better use.
Mm. Yeah, because just because the military use drives the development of it doesn't mean that if you approach it from a different angle that you could have developed the same technology for entirely peaceful domestic sort of everyday use. Yeah. Now, the talk of autonomous drones, where that could, that's taking us into the realms of science fiction, really. And certainly, I remember growing up reading science fiction novels, and it's the stuff of dystopias was, drones basically and robots, marauding around the place and policing people and, decisions taken out of human hands. And I mean, it really is the realms of science fiction becoming science fact, which quite often happens. And we can think of films like Terminator and RoboCop and to some extent in The Matrix, where it's the dynamic between, humans has gone, and it's a human-machine interface, which we have yet to develop one that really works very well.
Yes, I mean, I find myself as well reading much of this stuff and being appalled, and you kind of think that it's science fiction, really, but unfortunately it's not. Just in 2010, I should say last year, but 2010, there was a report from the chief scientist of the US Air Force that said that it won't be long before humans are the weakest part of the chain, and they were investigating seriously ways in which humans, the interface between humans and machines could be enhanced, either using genetics or all sorts of ways they were investigating, because humans were becoming the weakest part in the chain. And that's extremely worrying, and that sounds just like a science fiction dystopia, as you mentioned, but it's in fact happening. It's very bad.
Yeah, it's very worrying, and it's pure science fiction, except when it's not. One aspect of all this, which is we kind of touched upon it just a moment ago, is that we're thinking of drones, we're thinking of the UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, but there are moves afoot as well on land-based systems, certain types of vehicle, and what we could only call robots, basically. That's also an area where this sort of technology is moving forward.
Yes, certainly. I mean, I think the focus has been on unmanned aerial vehicles, but there are land vehicles and seas and boats and other types of unmanned vehicles being developed. There are unmanned land vehicles with guns attached to them, that are being and have been used in Afghanistan, for instance. But they're not very popular, and there are some problems with them. It's the unmanned aerial vehicles that have really taken off, if you forgive the pun. But there are also, much investigation into what are called nano or micro drones, where they are made very small and can swarm in groups and actually be able to be in touch with each other. This is kind of linked with cloud computing and things like that. This is a bit more distant, but again, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw this in the next decade.
Well, yeah, there's two issues there. One, this is a fascinating area that one of the presentations that you did, you had some slides which showed tiny little drones, for want of a better word. They look like insects, little tiny birds. I mean, this is a whole other. I mean, this is now people will be saying, "Oh, hold on a minute, this is science fiction," but this stuff's out there in development, and we're going to see more of it. And the implication, a lot of the issues are the same as with aerial drones, but there's a whole range of other implications there as well.
Yes, indeed. I mean, it's not particularly secretive. I mean, if you go to BAE Systems' website, they're quite proud of their work on micro drones and nanotechnology, and you can read about it on their website.
Mm-hmm. Now, one thing that came to light recently, there was some hysteria about it in certain corners of the media, and some misinformation, disinformation, was a land-based system called the Energetically Autonomous Tactical Robot, known as the ITER for short.
Right.
Now, this was developed by Robotic Technology Incorporated in the States, but partly by Dr. Robert Finkelstein, which I initially misread as Frankenstein. I had a bit of a chuckle when I did that. And a story was going around that this was a land-based system that was a robotic system designed to power itself on organic matter, which is what it's designed to do. But this was going to effectively mean the bodies of enemy combatants. So this robot was going to be in the combat zone, whatever, killing people and basically consuming their bodies. Now, this has been debunked somewhat, but the fact that Robotic Technology Incorporated actually had a statement on their website debunking this was interesting in itself, because the claim wasn't seen as so outlandish and so extreme to just be completely ignored by them.
Yes, I mean, that isn't one that I've come across, but another similar thing, I guess, was the recent media frenzy around nuclear-powered drones. You may have seen that there was investigation by US laboratory Sandia in the US that they would power drones by a small nuclear reactor, by nuclear fuel, because, as we've already discussed, the ability for drones to stay up in the air is one of the kind of real prized assets for the military. And one way that drones could stay longer up in the air would be if they were nuclear powered. But even the drone industry themselves recognized that would be a PR disaster to have nuclear-powered drones fly around, because one of the things that we haven't talked about is the fact that drones crash an awful lot. There are numerous crashes of drones. And so to combine this technology as prone to crash with nuclear power was a disaster that even the drone industry didn't want to take forward, thank goodness.
No, I mean, that would be catastrophic, because, of course, there wouldn't be much sort of fissile material in a small aerial drone, but it doesn't take very much. And if you have that potentially spread all over the globe, that would be, that, as we've seen with nuclear power stations, accidents do happen.
Absolutely. But I mean, I think it was also because the drone industry recognized that there is skepticism amongst the public about drones. Mm-hmm. They really don't want to do anything else at the moment that would increase that skepticism. So they're very intensely aware of the public perception of drones. So they're doing everything they can. There was even a report recently by the British drone industry, which is going around trying to counter the negative image of drones, and suggesting that manufacturers paint or manufacture their drones in pretty bright colours, like in order to to overcome this negative view of drones, which is kind of ludicrous. It makes you kind of wonder, what do these military industrial executives really think of the public?
I know, it's like saying, oh, well, here in Afghanistan, a US drone blew up our wedding party by accident, but actually it was a pink drone, so that's okay.
Exactly.
Well, that's probably why the story about the eater and the human bodies played so badly, and they were so keen to have that one shut down. The statement on Robotic Technology's website basically said, we completely understand the public's concern about futuristic robots feeding on humans, but that is not our mission. Which is not the most reassuring statement, and perhaps less reassuring. And I know I'm sort of focusing on this just because it was a headline case from recent times, but it's funded, that's this particular application, funded by DARPA, which is the US military's Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. So when that's the money behind it, well, you know what the end game is, really, what the purpose of that is.
And I think, lots of DARPA projects do come to fruition. Some of them, are supposed to be what they call blue skies thinking, but a lot of them do lead to actual military technology that's being used.
Interestingly, there's also, in terms of where land-based systems could end up or where they could be going, also from Robotic Technology, there's a section on their website addressing humanoid and legged robots, which basically sets out the case for working in this area. Because, well, to sum it up, it's that humans will interact most easily with robots that appear to be human. And again, realms of science fiction, but the work is going ahead. Serious people, serious money. And if it doesn't happen, it'll be for technical reasons, not for any others. Now, some of the issues with increasing use of drones, it seems to me, that we've not really touched upon. One is, for example, recruitment problems. And even though with the economy the way it currently is, certainly some young people are viewing the military as a guaranteed job. But there's no doubt in the grander scheme of things, recruitment is an issue, because for the longest time, I know there's always wars going on, but prior to 9/11, the military was often seen as a way to basically learn a skill and see the world, and the chances of you ever being in combat were minimal. And that's changed now. So with recruitment issues, you could see how use of drones could ameliorate that somewhat. There's also, with the length of combat tours, some US soldiers going back again and again with insufficient time off, there's a psychological strain on troops which isn't an issue for drones. And there's also the issue, of empathy, which ultimately even the most, the coolest, most stony-faced special forces have got some empathy somewhere in them. And there's this subtle discernment that human beings can make, and this will be an increasing factor as if drones become more autonomous. And of course, drones don't ask questions in the way that we do.
Yes, there is. I've been to debates where people, argue that drones are a good thing because, some of the My Lai massacres, as they kind of put it, come because, troops see their comrades or good friends, shot dead, and robots won't react in that emotional way, and will be able to be much more controlled. But obviously, the converse, as you rightly point out, is that drones cannot, or robots won't be able to kind of feel empathy. When they see an injured soldier, will not be able to stop from killing them, or really know the difference between a combatant and a civilian. So although people do sometimes try to portray that robots in war is a good thing, unfortunately, and kind of trying to program out the human being, I think human beings are still very much needed, and human beings are not the weak part of the chain. They're the best thing that there is.
Well, yes, and we were speaking earlier about the issue of taking people out of the decision-making chain being a strength, but ultimately we're dealing here with conflicts, between people, ideologies and ideas, but it's human conflict, and it's not going to be possible to make it completely in the machine realm, no matter how many drones you have, because the drones themselves are not creating a problem. They don't have an ideology, a concept, a way of doing things, a religion, or whatever it happens to be that some other drone or some other human being is going to be opposed to. And if we ever get to a situation where drones have an ideology and are causing problems for us, then the cat's really out of the bag and we've gone too far with this.
I mean, that is the kind of ultimate goal, I think, for those who are kind of investigating and researching, is to combine, self-aware robotics, self-aware, and of course, once they become self-aware, they will then perhaps have ideologies and beliefs and philosophies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, as we sort of, the last area I want to get on to is actually the overlap or the crossover into the civilian arena, because this is not just a military phenomenon, and we've touched upon a few issues that would affect, the civilian population, reasons why we should be concerned, basically. And civilian drone use is on the increase. The typical application these days is fairly harmless, but they're increasingly we'll see them being used as the old eye in the sky, which is the staple of dystopian fiction, from 1984 right through the whole panoply. And if we then factor in what you mentioned earlier about face recognition technology, and then perhaps link that to databases, which we know are on the increase with all sorts of personal information being held on there, that itself could form quite a sort of spy and control grid that could be applied in the civilian arena.
I mean, again, absolutely, that's right, Greg. I think there is a real concern that once drones are allowed to fly within UK airspace, it will proliferate and be a security and privacy nightmare. One of the biggest shocks to me, I've been investigating this for a couple of years now, has just been that the US drone lobby had this massive success in the land of the free in the US, where they have been mandated, the Federal Aviation Authority in the US has been mandated to allow drones to fly in civilian airspace by 2015, September 2015, which is an incredibly short space of time. And that's caused a real furore in the US, and it is going to happen. It's not like it's going to be discussed by 2015. They've been mandated that drones will fly in civil airspace by 2015. And what happens in the US tends fairly soon afterwards to come across the pond to Europe and to the UK. And here in the UK too, there is a really strong lobbying to allow drones to have unlimited and unrestricted access to the skies. Now that's a project. There's a program called Astraea, which is funded 50% by the government, but 50% by the big military companies, BAE System, Thales, Rolls-Royce, and others. And their aim is to change the regulations and to ensure that drones can fly within UK airspace. The Civil Aviation Authority here in the UK has been very strong and very strict, saying that safety has to be the primary thought here, and that drones have to be safe. And as we know, they crash a lot. So there's a long way to go. But already, I mean, just to be clear, you are allowed to fly a drone in the UK airspace if you get what's called a permission from the CAA. And we've done some investigation using Freedom of Information Acts, and there are about 50 to 60 companies flying drones already in the UK airspace, but under strict conditions. Those drones aren't allowed to fly higher than 400 feet or more than half a mile from the operator, and they're not allowed to be operated over individuals or buildings. So there are fairly strict controls, but they are flying at the moment. And there is a real push, particularly from here in the UK, but also at the European level, to open up British skies to unmanned aerial vehicles. And we have to strongly resist that, I think, for a number of reasons. Firstly, safety. but also privacy. One of the things that we've asked the Civil Aviation Authority is about what these drones, these 50 to 60 companies are doing with their drones here in the UK. And their response is, well, that's not their remit. Their remit is safety, to ensure the drones are flying safely. But it's not their remit to investigate what the people are doing with drones. And nobody, it appears, nobody has responsibility for ensuring privacy here in this country, except the Information Commissioner. And we suspect that the Information Commissioner isn't going to be wanted to operate in this area. But anyway, there is a real concern that drones will, the drone lobby will be able to open up British skies in the way that the US drone lobby has, and this must be resisted.
Well, I think there was at least one police force in the UK, I think it was in Essex, had trialled a drone, presumably for surveillance purposes. I'm not sure that was entirely successful. I haven't heard any more about that.
There have been about 3 or 4 police forces. They are among the 50 or 60 permissions that have been granted, but none of them, as you say, have been successful. There was one in Merseyside Police Force triumphed the fact that they'd had their first arrest by a drone, but then the Civil Aviation Authority really clamped down on them, saying they hadn't had a license at that time. And the Merseyside drone has subsequently crashed and ended up literally in the Mersey. And other police forces have also had similar problems. That's not to say, and some people will argue, well, there is a potential use for unmanned vehicles, in terms of safety, in terms of fire and rescue and things like that. And that's certainly possible. But the primary push, all the money behind the development of drones for civil use is currently in the military and security sector. And that's the worrying part.
Yes, and I know that this is a wider point, but I can't help thinking that if we're in a situation where, more drones are needed, not just to take the place of something, but to, be an adjunct, an add-on to something else, then, we have a problem. And, just sort of, that's what I can't, it's like saying, oh, we've recruited many more police this year. I say, well, if we need more and more police going forward, we have a problem. And I think it's just the same with drones. And talking of drones being used in a police context, that's not then a million miles, whether these trials have been unsuccessful or not, that's not a million miles away from the prospect of an armed civilian drone.
Well, we know in the US that they've have trialled tasers on drones. The police in the US have tried tasers. So again, as you say, I don't think it's a prospect that's imminent, but it's certainly not beyond the bounds of possibility that police forces would want to arm drones. As I said, they've already trialled tasers.
So we may not see it in our. Well, actually, I was going to say we may not see it in our lifetimes, but I wouldn't be surprised if we did. Down the shopping mall, being confronted by RoboCop saying, "Papers, please. Here are my papers. Those are not your papers. No, they are my papers." Computer says no. Bang, you're dead. Sounds a bit facetious, but it wouldn't surprise me. Now, the issue of, oddly enough, has come up with the issue of disrupting drones. You say that they crash a lot, and that we were talking earlier about using drones against, insurgents or small so-called terrorist groups that maybe don't have access to sort of technology and funding that the mainstream military would. There's still an issue of does the technology exist? And if it doesn't, it would certainly, you'd presume it would be developed to basically fight back against drones using more than just conventional weaponry. I don't know if you know anything about that area.
Well, I mean, it isn't. It's entirely logical, isn't it? Well, and it's kind of part of history that every time a new weapon is developed, it's not long before something is developed to counter it. And certainly, there have been discoveries in Afghanistan on laptops of the video feed from drones, US drones operating, and that was kind of embarrassing because it was discovered that the video feed from the drones hadn't actually been encrypted, and Al Qaeda or Taliban sources had managed to hack in and get the video feed. It would be very difficult, I would imagine, to hack and take over control of a drone because they're operated by, hardened satellites. But, who's to say that it won't happen? I mean, hackers seem to be able to get into anywhere and everywhere these days. And of course, Iran claims that they hacked in and grounded the RQ-170 drone, Sentinel drone, that crashed I suspect crashed in Iran just before Christmas. But they claim that they brought it down by spoofing its GPS receiver. But we don't know that for sure. So yes, it won't be long before there is a kind of battle over control of drones.
Well, perhaps one indicator might be that DARPA, them again, they're currently developing, ironically, something called HELADS, which you may have heard of. It's the High Energy Liquid Laser Area Defense System. They do like their fancy acronyms. This is basically a laser system which, unlike current military lasers, which are huge, size of a plane, this thing will fit on the back of a small truck, and you'll be able to use it to bring down drones. Developed by DARPA.
Yeah, and then we will, of course, get into the kind of area of drones protecting themselves. Yes, we go on into dystopia, as you said.
Quite. Well, perhaps that's a point where we should wrap it up for today, Chris. It's been absolutely fascinating with so many areas that we've got into and could get into. And as you say, in general, drone development and deployment, still early days. So this is by no means a mature technology. But perhaps in closing, you could tell listeners about your website, say something about the Drone Wars briefing document, which you put together. That's obviously something that's updated. And perhaps, I don't know if you've got any forthcoming talks or presentations that you want to mention.
Sure, thanks. That was a really interesting and wide-ranging discussion. Thanks for that. Yes, the website that Greg mentioned is www.dronewars.net, which is a kind of regularly updated blog with information about the use of drones and UAVs from a UK perspective, but also covering other countries as well. And as Greg said, there are a couple of briefings that we've written that are on there, and there are also links to other sources of information from those who are challenging drones and also from the military about what they're up to in drones. And again, as Greg said, I kind of travel around the country speaking about this, so have a look at the website and you'll see some of the dates. And if you're interested in inviting me to speak to a local group, you can also contact me through the website.
Chris Cole, Drone Wars UK, thank you very much for joining us today on legalizefreedom.com.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks a lot.
Well, that's it for this time. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to find out more about the issues discussed today, dronewars.net is the perfect place to start. Until next time, I'm Greg Moffat, and you've been listening to legalizefreedom.com.